in shaping the medical gastroenterology training. So, good evening, all three of you, and we can start the program. Over to you, Dr. Sethu Babu.
Yeah, we have decided to present two cases. At the end of 30 minutes, we might change to the second case as decided by Dr. Mahesh. The first case will be Dr. Rajesh.
So, Dr. Rajesh is he the final year student?
Yeah, he's going to introduce himself. That's
all right.
Okay. He's going to. Rajesh, can you show your slides?
Yes, sir. This is Dr. Rajesh, final year resident, DNB, KIMS Hospital, Hyderabad. First, I would like to thank the DNB board and the faculty and my mentors, the consultants who are present here, and my colleagues for giving me this opportunity. And now I would like to present this.
Your voice is breaking. I don't know whether it's only for me or for everybody. No, so breaking. Maybe you can put your video off. If you put your video off, then your slides will be better seen and your voice will be better heard. You can stop your video sharing. Yes, we can see the slide.
Yes, sir. Now I'm going to present a case of a young male presenting with a short history of gastric outlet obstruction, a diagnostic conundrum.
Dr. Rajesh, your internet is creating problems, so I request you to stop sharing your video and then continue. Your internet speed is down. Low. Yes.
Is it okay, sir, now?
Yeah, it's better.
Continue. Yeah, it's better.
He is a 31-year-old male, resident of Khammam district, engineer in a government sector, married, presented with pain abdomen for 1 month, weight loss of 5 kg in last 1 month, and vomitings for 15 days. HOP, the pain is in the upper mid abdomen, which is dull aching and continuous mild pain without any radiation or postural variation. The pain aggravates with food and relieves on vomiting. And there is an unintentional weight loss of 5 kg in last 1 month. Regarding vomitings, he had vomitings of 3 to 4 episodes per day, usually after taking food. The vomitings is non-bilious vomiting with food, whatever he has taken, and that is not associated with any blood. There is a postprandial fullness of abdomen for last 15 days. There is no history of any stale food. There is no history of any hematemesis or melena. There is no history of fever or loss of appetite. No history of any NSAID intake. No history of yellowish discoloration of eyes or urine. No history of constipation or obstipation. No history of jellish distension of abdomen. No history of oily stool, polyuria, or polydipsia. There is no history of loose stool, blood in stool, or joint pains. Coming to the past history, he had epigastric burning pain 1.5 years back without any vomitings. And even the burning pain was a short history for 1 to 2 weeks. And he has visited a local gastroenterologist. Upper GI endoscopy was done at a local hospital, which was showing antral gastritis with 2 small ulcers in the D1. The H. pylori test was done, and which was positive and treated for it with triple regimen. He was symptomatically better after the H. pylori regimen. He denies any history of any corrosive ingestion, no history of TB in the past or in the family or in close contacts. There's no history of abdominal surgeries. He denies any similar complaints in the past. No history of diabetes mellitus or hypertension. Personal history. There were no addictions, non-smoker, non-ethanolic, mixed diet. He is married with 2 children and both of them are healthy. And there is no history of any sexual promiscuity. After the initial history, then our working diagnosis was acid peptic disease, as he had a history of H. pylori infection with 2 small ulcers in the D1 with antral gastritis. We thought it as the first possibility, as it is a commonest disease, and it is common in the young patients also. And the next possibility, what we thought was gastric outlet obstruction, as he had pain with vomitings and a weight loss of 5 kg, unintentional weight loss of 5 kg for last 15 days. So we thought of gastric outlet obstruction, and gastric outlet obstruction, again, from the benign causes, we thought of peptic ulcer disease can be an acute or a chronic. Acute because of the inflammation and the edema, they can cause gastric outlet obstruction, and in chronic peptic ulcer. And in chronic peptic ulcer disease, it is because of the scarring can cause a gastric outlet obstruction. Coming to infiltrative diseases like tuberculosis can be one of the rare possibility. Crohn's disease and eosinophilic gastroenteritis, and the other rare causes we need to rule out. We need to rule out gastric amyloidosis, gastric sarcoidosis, gastric volvulus. Where are the other rare causes which we thought of gastric outlet obstruction? And the malignant causes, as there is a history of weight loss with pain and vomiting, so we thought of antral carcinoma or duodenal carcinoma, gastric lymphoma, as patient had H. pylori infection 1.5 years back. So there could be a gastric lymphoma also, Mott lymphoma. So these were the broad differential diagnosis what we thought of after the history. And acute pancreatitis was thought as pain, and as patient had pain and vomitings. As the pain is not typical of pancreatitis, that is a rare possibility. And acute cholecystitis, as patient had no jaundice and no fever, but still we can't rule it out. We need to get some investigation to rule it out completely, acute cholecystitis.
So can I interrupt, Dr. Situvamu, with your permission?
You should ask questions.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused about your working diagnosis. Your first diagnosis you said is acid peptic disease, and your second diagnosis is gastric outlet obstruction. And then in the gastric outlet obstruction, you have said benign and malignant. And then again, you have talked about peptic ulcer disease, your first possibility in the gastric outlet obstruction. So are you trying to explain everything by your first possibility, which is acid peptic disease? Or you think your syndromic diagnosis is gastric outlet obstruction, and from there you start? So you said that since there is a history and there was a documented duodenal ulcer, your first possibility is acid peptic disease. So you mean it's an uncomplicated acid peptic disease is your first possibility, or you think that the whole thing is gastric outlet obstruction and then you're talking of benign and malignant disease?
Acid peptic disease, without any complication, acid peptic disease also, without any complication also, they can have vomiting with pain abdomen. So as it is a commoner disease and already had a H. pylori infection, so that was the first possibility. Second possibility in this benign peptic ulcer disease, this is the complicated one with gastric outlet obstruction that we thought of.
Okay, in the malignant, you have talked about antral carcinoma, which I suppose gastric antrum you're talking about.
Gastric antral
duodenal carcinoma and gastric lymphoma. Now, do you think duodenal carcinoma is more common than duodenal lymphoma?
Yes, a duodenal adenocarcinoma.
You mean primary duodenal adenocarcinoma?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In that case, see, when you say gastric outlet obstruction, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean it's an obstruction at the level of the pylorus, or it can be obstruction even in the first part of duodenum will be called a gastric outlet obstruction?
Even at the level of duodenum also is called as gastric outlet obstruction.
So do you think a pancreatic head malignancy
can also cause
present like this?
Yes, can also cause gastric
I don't see that in your differential diagnosis.
I think Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Mahesh has got a very good point.
Yes.
You made that instead of saying the duodenal carcinoma, maybe slightly this comes up a little bit, because once you said carcinoma, duodenal carcinoma, they merge each other. Is that what you were trying to tell, Dr. Mahesh?
Yes, I thought if you are saying a gastric outlet obstruction, first of all, you should define what do you mean by gastric outlet obstruction. Does it mean that the obstruction is at the level of the pylorus only? Can it be an obstruction at the level of the gastric body? Can it be obstruction at the level of the first part of duodenum or second part of duodenum?
Obstruction from the gastric pylorus till D2, D3 also can label it as gastric outlet obstruction, sir.
Okay. The only clue which you gave, if I remember right, is that this was non-bilious vomiting.
Non-bilious vomiting. Yes.
So that possibly means that the obstruction is proximal to the middle part of the second part of duodenum.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Carry on. So these are your possibilities before examination.
Before examination.
All right. Okay.
On examination, general examination, there was no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, or palpable lymphadenopathy. is afebrile. Saturations were normal at room air, and there was no Verchuy's node. On abdominal examination, there were no visible lump, scars, or sinuses. Succussion flash test was positive. Liver and spleen were not palpable. There was no palpable lump or mass. There was no free fluid. Coming to labs, hemoglobin is
Before that, Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Mahesh expects you to correlate their historical findings and physical examination. Did you alter any diagnostic possibility? Even Dr. Ajit might have a similar question. Did you change your approach?
So your first possibility was acid peptic disease, uncomplicated. Do you still keep
sir.
that possibility, or you are changing your order?
Now,
That's what Dr. Sethubabu is asking.
Yes, sir. Now the order is the gastric coated obstruction, what we thought of, because the succussion splash test is positive.
Yes.
So that means that there is a gastric coated obstruction. So gastric coated.
When you examine for succussion splash, is there any time frame after meals when you should look for it, or you can examine and look for succussion splash, say 1 hour after the patient takes a meal, or 30 minutes after the patient takes meals?
You can give 1 to 1.5 liter of water, and we can within 15 minutes we can move the patient. We can tilt the patient or move the patient.
Oh, that's interesting. So you are talking of saline load test.
Yes, sir.
They are two different things. You are talking of succussion splash with after the normal meal, or you're talking of succussion splash being examined after giving a saline load?
After giving the saline load.
So that should have been mentioned is, let me call Professor Mahesh as examiner. This is a typical way. This is also a learning point how an examiner questions. So Dr. Rajesh, it was pointed out that you should say probably after a meal, or you did the test yourself and got convinced that there is an outlet obstruction. I think
Yes.
that's, is it Professor Mahesh you are questioning?
Yes. I think when you talk about succussion splash, you should not talk about giving normal saline. Usually succussion splash should be looked for when the patient has taken meal a couple of hours before you examine. So saline load test is a different test altogether. It is becoming an obsolete test nowadays. Nobody does a saline load test. When Dr. Ajit was doing his DM, maybe we talked about it, but we hardly in practice ever do a saline load test any further. All right, let's
I
proceed.
have
So
a
you have,
comment here.
yes,
In case succussion splash is negative after meal, means normally when you examine, and the patient you are suspecting has a gastric outlet obstruction. In that situation, a saline load test or even a half a liter or 600 ml of water can be given, and you can examine again after 15 or 30 minutes. And if it remains positive, that's because it depends on the grade of obstruction. If it is acute obstruction, the situation will be different. If it is a partial obstruction, the liquids may get out, and you may get only solid in the stomach. In that case, you will not get the saline. You will not get the succussion splash. So it depends upon the situation. If it is already present, then you have to ask what time he has taken his meal or the fluids. And then you can take a decision whether it is a succussion splash or not.
I want to ask both faculties in the interest of the postgraduates who are present. Do you want the consent to be taken for such a test, or is it okay if you mention? Is it to be done in the examination?
I would not ask for a consent.
I agree. Because it is not that difficult thing. You have to just give a little thresh, that's all, little tilt.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay, please go ahead.
Rajesh, go ahead.
Rajesh.
Lab studies, there was no anemia, differential count and the WBC and the platelet count were normal. Renal function tests were normal, electrolytes were normal. ESR was 33, MON2 is negative. Chest X-ray as normal study, there was mild hypoalbuminemia 3.3. Abdominal X-ray, erect and supine, there were no air fluid levels. Retroviral screening was done, which is negative. We have done an upper GI endoscopy. In upper GI endoscopy, there was nodularity with mucosal thickening, causing complete gastric outlet obstruction.
So
And
was this endoscopy done after fasting or because I don't
After
see any residue here?
Or after aspiration.
after fasting,
Fasting.
sir. After fasting.
Fasting
He was
without
not able to-
aspiration, RT aspiration.
without
Yes, no
RDS. Actually, he was not tolerating liquids also. So
So what do you think is, it suggests, if this is the picture in a patient where only fasting is there and you see this picture, what does it suggest? It suggests
Dr.
the
Ajit is
grade-
possibly asking the criticality of gastric artery
Yeah,
obstruction.
the
Do you
grade
think
of
it's a
obstruction.
very severe form of
Yes.
gastric artery obstruction, or you think it's a mild form of gastric artery obstruction?
Partial, you can say. So it is
All
not
right.
a complete obstruction.
yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Carry on.
We'll come back to this picture again. Describe the picture and then give your impression.
There was nodularity with gross mucosal thickening noted in the antrum, and there is no distensibility of the stomach on air insufflation. Scope could not be negotiated into duodenum. There was no focal ulcer or a food residue. The multiple biopsies were taken from the nodularity, and the impression was gastric outlet obstruction, query entis plastica, query gastric lymphoma on endoscopy.
Okay.
Professor Mahesh, your
first
comment?
possibility is Linitis plastica, or your first possibility is lymphoma?
As per the slide, it's single question mark for linitis, double question mark. Double queries for lymphoma. That means.
I think it's very difficult to differentiate endoscopically. But if your pylorus would have been intact and you could grow into the duodenum, if the duodenum also shows a nodularity, then the lymphoma will become higher
Lymphoma.
than the Linitis plastica. So if there is any lesion which extends across the pylorus into the duodenum, it's more likely to be lymphoma, but one can never be certain, but it's more likely to be lymphoma than adenocarcinoma. You agree?
Rajesh, are you
Dr.
adding,
Yes,
Rajesh, are
yes.
you adding a video in this one? No.
Very important point. It's everyone
No, sir.
should note it.
Right. Okay, that's a first thing is video could have actually made. Anyway, let's see because how you are going to develop the case.
See, there was neutrophilic infiltrate is seen focally infiltrating the gastric glands with scattered non-caseating granulomas, epithelial cell granulomas, and H. pylori bacilli were seen. The histopathological diagnosis was acute and chronic gastritis. First possibility was H. pylori etiology. Second possibility was Crohn's disease on biopsy. As
You have this biopsy to be shown?
Yeah, slide.
this is the gastric mucosal biopsy. This
Not
is the
yet.
non-caseating.
Yeah, it's okay now.
This is the non-caseating on gastric mucosal biopsy. As there was complete obstruction, as the primary diagnosis, what we thought was lenitis plastica or a gastric lymphoma, we have done a CT abdomen with contrast to look for the resectability or any other abdominal findings. So there was a circumferential enhancing wall thickening in the pylorus region of the stomach, causing moderate luminal narrowing. There was enlarged perigastric, peripancreatic, omental, and mesenteric lymph nodes, largest measuring 10 mm to 15 mm of diameter. The impression of abdomen was CA stomach, possibility of CA stomach with omental and nodal involvement. And we have done a PET CT, look for any distant lesion. So PET CT was showing increased FTG uptake in the pyloric region with uptake in the lymph nodal in perigastric, peripancreatic, and mesenteric lymph nodes, which was also the possibility of CA stomach with nodal and omental involvement was still there.
Partha, can I ask you a question? Why did you do both a CT scan first and then a PET CT again? Could you have avoided that CT scan if you were really interested in doing a PET? What extra information did you get, or was it done as a different places that the two evaluation was done? Cost matters.
Yes, sir. We could have done only a CT chest. CT chest with abdomen. We can avoid a PET CT. You could avoid it.
Why not only PET CT? Question I think Mahesh is asking. Instead of going for both, only a PET CT because you are seeing the CT also at the same time. You are seeing the PET also.
CT, chest and abdomen will be a cost-wise, it will be less than compared to a PET CT.
No, forget about the cost. You
Cost
need
difference.
scientific explanation.
Yes.
Nobody is going to say you have done a wrong thing, but you need to justify whenever you are doing. PET CT is usually done in abdominal malignancies to stage the disease and or to operate or resectability. CT has given reasonable evidence. Probably, if I am asked the same question, I thought I'll eliminate distant metastasis using PET as more sensitive to exclude so that I can think of some kind of an operability because he has got gastric outlet obstruction, young fellow.
Sir, can I say something?
you
With
should.
your permission?
You
I
should.
think
You should.
there's always this debate about PET versus a whole body CT when you have an abdominal lesion that we've discovered. I think from my understanding, a good quality CT, for example, if you are dealing with a pancreatic head malignancy, actually gives you a little bit more information about the local information about resectability and vascular invasion. In that sense, it may be slightly better than a PET scan. But it is, there's no uniformity on what one should be doing. But I think that's where a PET would probably be, CT would probably be slightly different to a PET.
Yeah, I think if the cost is not a consideration, then I think the both is better.
But the point being made, as rightly made, is why not do one modality rather than just do both at the same time. I guess one advantage that PET CT might have over a CT chest and abdomen is lot of times, from doing media EUS, we find these mediastinal nodes, and if you have a functional study like a PET, the mediastinal node may light up and it may give you evidence of distal metastasis. So each one probably has its own advantages over the other.
Yeah,
I think
same
what Dr. Sharath said is right. Sorry, Ajit. The justification is we were looking at young fellow resectability as one of our options. Even though there are lymph nodes, hence he has got a gastric outlet obstruction. I think resectability was one such question which we had. And yes, the argument is well noted. A good CT would as good as PET CT. For a distant metastasis, it is done. Yes, it is a debatable point as Dr. Sharath said.
But if you have the facility of PET and patient is affordable, I think PET is all in a malignant suspicion. It's always better to go for PET. Sometimes it changes some treatment.
Sir, I think if it is a HPV malignancy, I'm seeing these guys very closely. The surgeons would prefer a good quality triphasic CT over a PET scan for local assessment.
No, what I'm saying both.
I think even the evidence-wise, I think in the esophagus, it is well documented that PET is better than a CT scan, whereas for the upper abdominal malignancy, I think there is a question whether the PET has any advantage. Let's move on because I think we are running out of time.
Yeah, please.
No, you present quickly now. I think,
CT showed there was a pyloric thickening, circumferential wall thickening at the pylorus region on the plain and contrast CT, and the PET CT was showing there was an uptake in the pyloric region. Even in the abdominal lymph nodes also, there was an uptake. As the patient had complete gastric outlet obstruction, surgical consultation was taken. As the primary biopsy was inconclusive, we thought of going for a diagnostic laparoscopy so that it would be useful for the diagnostic purposes. And in case of inoperability, we can go for a palliative surgery also. So we have done a diagnostic laparoscopy. On intraop findings, there was an antral growth with peritoneal nodular deposits in the lesser omentum. And there was abdominal lymph nodes also. And the nodular deposits were taken for biopsy and laparoscopic GJ was done.
1 minute. What was the impression of laparoscopy?
The surgical impression was they thought it is as a CA stomach, an inoperable CA stomach. Because of an antral growth, they thought it as a malignancy, and there was nodular deposits. They thought it as METs. So they have done a palliative GJ.
Okay. So before you proceed, what was the chest X-ray finding or
Chest X-ray was
CT
normal, sir.
Okay.
Chest X-ray was normal. Chest X-ray. Now, on biopsy, it came out to be necrotizing epithelial granulomas with Langhans giant cells, which is favoring Cox etiology. And the biopsy, there was no evidence of any epithelial cells, no evidence of malignancy. AFB stain was done, which is negative. So this is the lymph node biopsy. This is the caseating epithelial granulomas with Langhans giant cells, which is favoring Cox etiology.
Mahesh, please permit us to discuss completely and then you put questions so that we complete it.
Sure.
Okay, Rajesh, you go ahead and give your.
Yes, sir. The final diagnosis was gastric tuberculosis causing gastric outlet obstruction with abdominal, with peritoneal and omental involvement. So laparoscopic GA was done, and we started on ATT for 6 months. On follow-up, after 6 months, we have done an endoscopy. Endoscopy, GA stoma was normal, which is functional, and D1 is narrowed, and scope could not be negotiated into D2. And the follow-up CT abdomen after 6 months was done. There was the enlarged lymph nodes was not visible on a follow-up CT scan, and there was very minimal thickening in the pylorus when compared to the PET CT or a CT scan previous studies. There was significant reduction in the thickening in the pylorus. And the ESR initially was 33, and the ESR came down to 5, and patient had gained weight of around 10 kg in last 6 months, and he is doing fine now. We have called him yesterday, and he was doing well, and there are no other complications. Coming to the discussion of gastric outlet obstruction. So the benign causes, the most common cause of benign causes is the caustic injury, the corrosive injury, which causes gastric outlet obstruction after 6 to 12 weeks. The peptic ulcer disease, acute and chronic. The pancreatitis, acute and chronic, and acute severe, including group pancreatitis. And there are many other causes of benign causes, gastric volvulus, and there are other rare causes. And the other common infiltrative causes are the Crohn's disease, which is less than the 5% of the gastroduodenal Crohn's is less than 5%. Involvement is seen in less than 5%. Gastric tuberculosis, the prevalence is, the incidence is 0.3 to 2.3 of patients with tuberculosis and eosinophilic gastroenteritis. In
Just one small suggestion, I'm sorry, but just go back to the slide. Whenever you write Crohn's now, whether you are writing in the beginning of the sentence, the middle of the sentence, C has to be capital.
Okay. Sure.
Carry on, carry on.
Coming to the malignant causes, the CA stomach is the most common cause of GO. The neoplastic gastric or pancreatic adenoCA with extension to duodenum or stomach. The rare causes are the lymphoma, gastric lymphoma, D1 neoplasm, CA, GB, or cholangio with extension. Malignancy of the duodenum, primary or metastatic gastric carcinoid, or GIST. And regarding the literature, this was published in Gastrointestinal Endoscopy in 2018 by Rakesh Kocha sir, and he has studied the etiological spectrum and response to endoscopic balloon dilatation in patients with benign gastric outlet obstruction. And this is a large study which has included around 19 years, included around 306 patients. In that 306 percent, 264 underwent dilatation. In this, the most common cause of gastric outlet obstruction was the caustic ingestion, which comprises around 54%, and next comes the peptic ulcer disease, and the medication like NSAIDs comprises 8.3. Among this, the caustic ingestion required most number of dilatations, around the mean was around 5 to 6 dilatations. The rest required less dilatations. In this study, the TB stomach was not as common as expected when compared to other studies. And this is the other study from GB Pant, Maharshi et al. With Puri sir. In 2016, there was a publication, and in this, we can see that the corrosive TB stomach and peptic ulcer more or less are equivalent, and each comprising of 25% of the total cases. The total cases were around 60 cases, and in that 60, the 25% corresponds to corrosive. The next comes the tuberculosis, which is also 25%, which is they are saying that it's a common cause of gastric outlet obstruction. The peptic ulcer causing 15%. The rest comprises other 25%. The same thing. This is another study which was published in Indian Journal of Tuberculosis from Amarendra Puri sir in 2013. This duodenal tuberculosis uncommon presentation of TB as gastric artery obstruction. In this also, the multiple endoscopic biopsies were taken. Once the initial biopsy was negative, the multiple endoscopic biopsies, including snare biopsy, was taken, and the deeper biopsies would come as positive, as the mucosal biopsies may not reveal caseating granulomas, as the granulomas are mostly seen in the submucosal region, and the AFB bacilli were not seen in most of the studies. The AFB bacilli, because it is possible in the stomach, and the acid environment is not favorable for TB bacilli, and because of the rapid transit time, the bacilli may not retain here. So the deeper mucosal biopsy should be done. And the treatment, most of them got better with ATT on an endoscopic dilatation. And this other study from All India Institute, Govardhan et al. In 2004, this was published. In this, the most common presented, he has seen 23 patients in a 15 years of span. Out of 23 patients, the presentation of gastric tuberculosis was GOA is the most common presentation of TB stomach, so which comprises of 61%, and the UGA bleed as its next common presentation as 26%. And rarely, the TB stomach can present as periampullary mass or antral mass, which is the case in our scenario, as there was an antral growth on diagnostic laparoscopy, which may mimics malignancy, as there was abdominal lymphadenopathy with omental thickening. So we thought it as a CA stomach. Coming to Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease, which comprises less than 5% of the patients' gastroduodenal involvement. So mostly they have a continuous involvement within involvement of antrum, pylorus, and proximal duodenum. Majority will have a concomitant disease in the distal GIT, or they develop symptoms of distal GIT at a follow-up or on a long period. Most of them will not have any symptoms related to gastroduodenal involvement. They have GO because of a stricture. Coming to Linitis plastica, the age of presentation was 60 to 87 years, in which the diffuse type of cancer, in which the cancer cells invade in the muscular layer of the submucosal layer, resulting in thickening and rigidity of the stomach. In endoscopy, the mucosa may appear normal, but there will be poor distensibility of the stomach, which may be the only endoscopic finding. And the superficial mucosal biopsy will be negative, so deep biopsy should be taken.
I think we need to wind up this presentation. Yes, thank you. Last slide.
Last the take-home message is the gastric tuberculosis with abdominal nodal involvement is a differential diagnosis in a patient with GO in a tropical country like India. The gastric TB can present as an antral mass mimicking a CA stomach. So the repeat endoscopic biopsy or snare biopsy should be done in a patient with an inconclusive first HPE report. So gastric cancer should be kept in mind in a patient with GO, even in any age group, as CA stomach can happen even in any age. Thank you, sir.
So there's a question on the chat box. Was gene expert done for MTB from upper GI endoscopy? Obviously, it was not done because that was not suspected.
You don't know,
Isn't it?
Yes.
not done.
So I have a question which I just want to answer. If the diagnosis would have been definite at endoscopy, would your approach be different than what it happened? Say if you would have got the diagnosis of tuberculosis on endoscopy, will you have given ATT and did the dilatation on the gastric outlet, or you think a surgery was anyway required?
We could have avoided a surgery. After ATT, most of the time, within 1 to 2 weeks, there can be some amount of opening of the gastric outlet obstruction, and we can do dilatation after that.
Yeah, but in this case, after giving 6 months of therapy, also endoscope could not be passed on the second part of duty.
Yes, sir.
So
In
maybe
this case,
this was not a good candidate for.
yes, sir.
You're fortunate maybe that you did not have a diagnosis and you did a laparoscopy. And the question is that what is the duration of ATT in such situation? Is it standard 6 months or?
I think a good 9 months is very, very important, and probably reassess, because 9 months is minimum.
Extra
the-
pulmonary.
So the study suggests that even 6 months course is good enough. But the intuition always says that extrapulmonary tuberculosis should be
Yes.
little over-treated. And even the strictures, the study from B.S. Anand et al. Had shown, long study, long back, I think in 1988 also, we extend the ATT time, some more patients will resolve the strictures. So I think a little longer period is always better, preferably 9 months or 12 months. And if the stricture has not resolved, you can still go ahead. Here, because this patient already GJ done, so you may not do a duodenal dilatation, but still I feel that can be done so that that passage remains open, even if the patient develops later on an stenosis of the GJ stoma. That can be done. It depends. It's not a must.
I think we have overcrossed the time, so should we move on to the second presentation?
Yes. Partho will come in.
So one correction should be there in this. The last sentence, gastric cancer should be kept in mind, is wrong. I think gastric tuberculosis should be kept in mind, never in the patient with GO.
No. He has a different sentence. Let Partho come in. His word is just because young don't say it is not malignant, because we have seen younger people with malignancy. He has a different connotation. I agree with you. The sentence can be reprogrammed.
But this is a tuberculosis. This is not
Yes.
malignancy, no?
No, this is not. Even young
It's the
fellow.
reverse.
Yeah. True. He has put the sentence. Agreed. It's a question of semantic issue. It's okay.
Right.
Partho, you are coming in.
Yes, good evening, sir.
Introduce.
I'm Dr. Parth Wadadia, first year gastro resident, KIMS Hospitals, Secunderabad. I'm thankful to the NB, the faculty members and respected teachers for giving me this opportunity to present my case. My case is a 57-year-old married male residing in Hyderabad, presented with diffuse pain in the upper abdomen for 2 days, vomitings for 2 days, and abdominal tightness for last 2 days. The pain was sudden onset, diffuse, more in the upper part, in the epigastric region, which was continuous dull aching, moderate intensity, which was non-radiating, usually occurring after meals with no postural relation, progressively increasing over the last 2 days. The vomitings were 5 to 6 episodes per day, which were non-projectile, clear with or without food, and non-bilious in nature, not foul smelling, small amount, and usually after intake of food for the last 2 days. He also complained of abdominal fullness in form of tightness since last 2 days. There was no history of fever, altered bowel habits, no history of weight loss, reduced appetite. There was no history of any yellow discoloration of eyes and urine, and no history of any hematemesis or melena. No history of any NSAIDs or any drug abuse, and he was also non-ethanolic. Past history, there was no any similar history of episode of pain in the past. He is a known case of diabetes on oral agents glimepiride and metformin for last 2 years. He had a history of tubercular meningitis, for which he completed a course of ATT in 2013. There was no history of any abdominal surgeries. So the working diagnosis based on the history was there was a syndrome of upper abdominal pain with vomitings and abdominal fullness and tightness over a period of last 2 days. So initially we thought of it as a complicated peptic ulcer disease, which can give rise to vomitings and pain abdomen. The second possibility was biliary colic, any stone in the gallbladder, which can give rise to pain and vomiting. The third possibility may be acute pancreatitis, and rarely mesenteric ischemia, diabetic ketoacidosis, or proximal small bowel obstruction and gastric outlet obstruction.
Mahesh, would you like to comment?
So I just wanted to know from you that you have basically, when you talk of syndrome, you said upper abdominal pain, vomiting, and abdominal fullness. So how do you explain with your second possibility, abdominal fullness or tightness? Biliary colic.
Biliary colic.
Somebody has, you said tightness for 2 days, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So a biliary colic will come and go. It will not last for 2 days continuously and will not have distension of abdomen lasting for 2 days. So though the biliary colic we all know is not a classical colic, but it will not last for 2 days unless there is a complication.
Yes, sir.
So do you still want to keep that as a second possibility, or you want to avoid mentioning that as a possibility?
Yeah, sir, we would like to keep it up later on because it's typically it won't be a continuous type of pain.
So pain can be continuous, but if it asks for 2 days, it's usually more than biliary colic. Then you have to think of cholecystitis.
Yes. So why
And
not
rather than
biliary
a biliary
colic with
colic.
cholecystitis? Instead of
Yes, sir.
saying biliary colic, why can't it be biliary colic, or you can simply say acute cholecystitis?
Acute cholecystitis. Yes, sir.
Yes. So inflammation that can involve the duodenum, that can produce fullness, vomitings, pain,
Yes, sir.
everything can be there.
Yes,
So
sir.
instead of saying biliary colic, as Dr. Mahesh said, no, it is episodic. It comes and goes. Then you call it as a
Yes.
biliary colic. But if it is complicated by inflammation, cholecystitis, then better term will be cholecystitis, acute cholecystitis. It may be, I think that.
In fact,
Yes,
what both faculty is saying, there is nothing like biliary colic. You need to give some kind of etiological cause there. Is that what you people mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, carry on.
And on a general examination, we found him to be afebrile. The pulse rate was 110 per minute, blood pressure 110 by 70 mm of mercury, saturation on room air was 98%, respiratory rate 18 per minute, and his blood sugars were 156 mg per dl. There was no
blood sugar doesn't come under general examination.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, yes.
Yes.
Carry on.
Agreed. Agreed.
There was no pallor, edema, icterus, clubbing, lymphadenopathy, or any cyanosis. On abdominal inspection, the abdomen was flat. It was freely moving with respiration. There was no visible veins, pulsations, peristalsis, or mass. On palpation, there was no palpable mass. The abdomen was soft, diffuse upper abdominal tenderness was present. Mild diffuse distension was there, and no organomegaly was found. On percussion, the abdomen was diffusely tympanic over the upper and central abdomen. And on auscultation, the bowel sounds were heard 3 to 5 per minute. No added bruit or venous hum. The lab's evaluation showed neutrophilic.
Partho, before that, you add your physical findings to your first clinical and then come to a better conclusion than what you
And diagnosis, differential diagnosis.
the examination you're supposed to do that.
Yes, sir. So I would like to keep the diagnosis of acute pancreatitis more, basically depending on the site of the pain.
Is there anything
So, how commonly you get a normal bowel sounds in patient with acute pancreatitis, and you've written soft abdomen.
Yes, sir.
Bowel sounds are usually not normal in acute pancreatitis of a significant severity. They can be, but usually bowel sounds will not be normal. I saw your next slide, and I know you have established a diagnosis of acute pancreatitis, but this is a little odd findings as I can find. Yes, Dr. Ajit, you agree with that?
Yeah. It's fine.
I think we make the same comment at the end so that all the people know how to, like, even putting the words like diffusely tympanic and all. It should be very careful when you make such statements.
Okay, sir.
You can go ahead.
The initial lab evaluation showed neutrophilic leukocytosis. The total counts were 13,000 with neutrophils 85%. The RFT, renal and liver parameters were normal. The CRP was elevated, 16 mg per dl. The HbA1c was 7.5%. Triglycerides and calciums were normal. The amylase was more than 3,000 and lipase more than 4,000 units per liter. And the viral screen was negative. The patient underwent CECT abdomen after 72 hours.
What viral screen are you talking about?
Sir, the HBsAg, HCV, and HIV, sir.
Okay.
CECT abdomen was done after 72 hours, which showed tiny enhancing nodule in the arterial as well as the portal phase in the D1. The pancreas was mildly bulky with mild peripancreatic fat standing. We also noticed edematous thickening in the D2 and proximal D3 segments of the duodenum, along with the enhancing nodule. So it was, the impression was suspected to be query NET, neuroendocrine tumor. Then we sent out the tumor markers. The CEA level was normal and CA19-9 was elevated, 83 units per ml.
That means it is NET with pancreatitis. Just go back. The other
Yes.
features are suggestive of pancreatitis.
Pancreatitis.
Here, NET suspicion was NET with pancreatitis.
NET with pancreatitis.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But are you justifying that you have pancreatitis on one side, there is a neoplasic NET on the duodenum? Is that what you are trying to explain?
Yeah, that's what he is mentioned. In D1 segment of duodenum, that was the NET was there
The enhancing nodules.
in the D1 segment,
Yes.
and D2 and D3 was only edema. So pancreatic fat standing, edematous duodenum with nodules in the D1, which were suggestive of NET plus other
So
features
what
of pancreatitis.
possibly Dr. Ajit is asking you is that is there any relationship between NET in the D1 with pancreatitis? Is there any causal relationship between the two?
You have
Don't get
established.
worried. I mean, if you may not know the answer, you just say yes, no, or you're not sure.
Not sure, sir. I'm not sure.
All right, let's see how the
Yeah,
case proceeds.
please,
Because
because NET might be there in D2 also. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, sir. We did an upper GI endoscopy where we found a large ulcer nodular growth at the ampulla. There was no active ooze, bleeding, or any obstruction. So biopsies were taken for HP histopathology examination, and our impression initially was query ampullary carcinoma. The biopsy report, as you can clearly see, the right side is the normal mucosa, and the left side shows atypical glands in the villus pattern, with most of the glands showing focal high-grade dysplasia in the form of nuclear stratification and increased mitotic activity with hyperchromatic nuclei. So the impression given was tubulovillous adenoma with low-grade dysplasia. So our diagnosis was acute pancreatitis, etiology being periampullary obstructive lesion. And the plan on follow-up was to repeat the biopsy to confirm the histological diagnosis and get an endoscopic ultrasound to see the extent and depth of the lesion to decide on the operability, and then decide whether a pylorus preserving surgery or Whipple's procedure was needed. And if the lesion was a non-malignant adenoma, we could go for local resection of the ampulla. This was one of the case reports which was published in Journal of Pancreas 2011, where a 65-year-old woman was admitted with acute recurrent necrotizing pancreatitis with pseudocyst formation, and she underwent lap cholecystectomy for gallstones. Post surgery, there was a rise in the liver function tests, and MRCP was performed, which shows dilated CBD with no obvious cause for obstruction. So ERCP was planned, which showed growth at the ampulla, and the biopsies were taken, which revealed a poorly differentiated adenocarcinoma. So the neoplastic lesions of the ampulla are a very rare cause of acute and recurrent pancreatitis, and 30% of recurrent pancreatitis usually remain undiagnosed after routine evaluation. The usual presentation of carcinoma of ampulla is with painless jaundice. So the periampullary cancers usually are considered those that arise within 1 centimeter of the papilla of Vater, which can include ampullary, pancreatic, bile duct, as well as the duodenal cancers. And the pancreatitis usually arises as a result of blockage at these levels and intrapancreatic activation of the enzymes. CA19-9 also is an important independent factor in evaluating the resectability, predicting the prognosis, and marker for monitoring the progression of the disease. The most sensitive imaging modalities considered are endoscopic ultrasound and CT scan, which have been recommended as first line, where pancreatic and periampullary cancer is suspected. Surgery, that is Whipple's surgery, remains the only treatment modality that offers a chance for cure. Invasive or in situ carcinoma has been reported in approximately 30% of villous tumors involving the periampullary region. This is the second case report, which was published in Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology as recurrent acute pancreatitis caused by ampullary villous adenoma. Pancreatitis was found to have an irregular bulbous mass 1 centimeter involving the ampulla, and the biopsy showed villous adenoma without malignant degeneration. Villous adenoma involving ampulla is very rare, actually less than 1%. So the ampulectomy was done in this patient along with sphincteroplasty and CBD and pancreatic duct reimplantation. So the protocol here was followed. If the endoscopic biopsy, the lesion is malignant and resectable, Whipple's procedure was performed. If the lesion is unresectable, biliary enteric bypass was done along with gastroenterostomy. If the lesion is benign, you can either remove it by endoscopy or surgery locally. But it still needs an endoscopic surveillance every 6 months in follow-up as these lesions tend to recur. This was another study published in Gastroenterology Research and Practice in 2020, where they evaluated pancreatic Whipple's surgery for periampullary tumors presenting with acute pancreatitis. They found the prevalence of pancreatic cancer in individuals presenting with acute pancreatitis from 2 to 13%. In this study, they found 5% patients with acute pancreatitis had periampullary tumors. The reported prevalence of acute pancreatitis in IPMN ranges from 12 to 67%, and the tumors of the duodenum rarely cause acute pancreatitis. These have been published as case reports. And EUS is one of the most accurate methods they have found in this study also for diagnosing and staging the pancreatic disease. EUS FNSE also helps in obtaining cytological samples from the pancreatic lesion, making the pathologic diagnosis possible. And the Whipple's remains the preferred treatment of choice in these patients with periampullary tumors. It was found the duration of surgery and the intraoperative blood loss were higher in patients with acute pancreatitis due to peripancreatic inflammation and adhesion. However, the incidence of post-operative outcomes, including the infection, hospital stay, mortality, were similar to those observed in patients without acute pancreatitis. So the usual causes of acute pancreatitis are obstructive, alcohol, drugs, metabolic including hypertriglyceridemia, diabetes, hypercalcemia, infective causes, post-operative, hereditary genetic, and idiopathic. So the take-home message would be, although the acute pancreatitis and recurrent pancreatitis remain a rare presentation of periampullary lesions, a high index of suspicion is important where the etiology is not found or is obvious. Periampullary lesions should also be suspected in such scenarios for early diagnosis of malignancy and timely decision of appropriate treatment.
So the main question, Partha, in this case is, what is your plan now? You have not been able to prove that it is a malignant lesion. You have said that it's adenoma with dysplasia. So what is your plan? You said you'll follow up. But then if it's a malignancy, are you justified in following up for months when the tumor may spread? So
can you
what
show
is your
slide,
plan in
sir?
this picture?
Yeah. Can you show that slide which is fourth or fifth? Go back and show your final impression. Go back.
No, the question is very simple. Why there is a delay in proving the diagnosis? Just Arthur.
Next.
On follow-up, sir, we would like to
Next.
Repeat the biopsy, sir, initially to confirm the diagnosis. We need to establish it as a malignancy first, sir.
No, so what is the age of the patient? I missed it. What is the age of the patient?
57 years, sir. 57.
57 years. So when will you call for the follow-up? What biopsy will you do this time? will you do an ampulectomy now to find out whether it's and send that whole ampulla for the histopathology? Because you have to take important decisions. You can't be sitting on it if it's a malignant lesion.
Yes, sir. We'll do an incisional biopsy. We'll take a deeper section of the tissue to prove that as a malignancy.
All right, if you take another
Okay.
lesion and it still comes out to be benign, what's your plan?
Then we can get an EUS done, sir, to check on the depth of lesion, whether it is invading the muscle layer or whether it is superficial, whether any EMR can be done rather than a radical surgery because the lesion is benign.
EMR,
Don't use the word EMR. Here we
Such
are
a
talking
large
about
lesion.
ampulectomy.
Ampulectomy, yes, sir.
So I think if you do another biopsy and if that turns out to be benign also, then you're totally justified in doing an ampulectomy in this case rather than going on taking biopsies and not able to clear the things. Because see, this episode, I don't know whether we can really pinpoint and say that it's all because of the ampullary tumor. But if it's because of the ampullary tumor, you have to remove the tumor as fast as possible because the next episode of pancreatitis may not be mild.
Yes, sir.
And also, when you are suspecting malignancy, you have to be fast enough so that it before it becomes inoperable. Patient is only 57. So
Yes, sir.
if you should give all the possibilities to get a cure. Ampullary tumor, they are very good tumor to get cure. You can
Yes,
do the surgery and patient it can become.
No, no, no. The objective of presentation is periampullary lesions can present as acute pancreatitis.
Correct.
I agree.
That is
Yeah,
agree.
the patient is being attended. The plan of action is very clear.
So one question, Dr. Setu Babu, is that if
Yes,
it's
sir.
an obstructive pancreatitis,
Yes.
do you expect pancreatic duct to be dilated?
Ideally, it should have been, but I still do not know because why this is not dilated or in this one. But we were actually little surprised to see that particular lesion, and it shows dysplasia. That is why we said we repeat, and if the biopsy shows significant dysplasia, he could go for a modified or Whipple's, which could be a definitive treatment.
I can give an answer. This actually depends upon the grade of obstruction. If it is a severe enough, completely obstructing, then you expect dilated. If it is only partially obstructing, it may not get dilated. Second thing, there may be sloughing. Periampullary tumors are known to produce sloughing. So if there is sloughing, duct opens and dilatation goes off. So there may be these two things are possible. So it's not necessary that all obstructions will be complete and will get complete. You see, in the CBD stones, when the ducts are not dilated, there is obstruction. Why? Because there is a partial obstruction. So same thing can happen with the tumor. It may not be snugly closing the opening or the duct, pancreatic duct. I think that
Okay,
is
so
possible.
two good presentation. The final comment from the three faculty. Yes, Dr. Setu Babu, Dr. Ajit, and do you want to make any comment?
Yeah,
we
I'll just make one comment. The first case was tuberculosis patient. It is a good case and complete workup was done and a good follow-up and patient is doing well. So the message is also very clear. Any gastric outlet obstruction in our country, if the diagnosis is not coming forward, always think of tuberculosis also. The picture may not be very clear. The second case, yes, it's a good case because one of the rare presentations, but it further needs further follow-up and whatever the plan. The only thing, it has to be faster so that patient gets a chance to get cured. So, but both the residents have done well. I think they have. Always there is a chance for improvement. They should, but they have done well, pretty well.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Mahesh, you have to say. I have a little bias about these two people.
Even I have a bias. No, even I have a bias. So Mahesh will give the correct.
I think they've both presented well, but there is a scope for improvement. I'm a little bit of fussy about the slides, but I don't like spelling mistakes in the capital and smalls. Like for Whipple's procedure, I will want Whipple is the name of a person, so W should be always capital. Pardon me for being a little bit fussy about it, but I think this is the time for them to learn that where to use what abbreviations they're using, where they're using capitals, where they're leaving gaps. You remember Dr. Dr. Nayak.
Yes, very particular.
He used to be very, very particular about slides, how the fonts are used. I think this is something which they need to learn now, and if they don't learn it now, they will never learn them in the future. So I think both the cases are very good, well presented, but there is a scope for improvement in the presentation. That's all I would say, that they should
Yes, excellent.
possibly spend some more
noted.
time on the slides.
Noted. Actually, I did not do any correction. I told them to present de novo, and I didn't make any correction to them. So I think what your points are well noted, and there is a very good scope for further improvement, further discussion. And thank you very much for giving the opportunity.
Mahesh is attached to the journal a lot. So I think if you are going to
He knows.
publish anything, it is going to be rejected. So the resident, they should note it. All the
No,
residents
we
are
always ask them to write,
listening.
improve the English. We never reject because of
Yes.
this, but we always write to them to
Yes.
please take help of some
Yeah,
professional.
yeah, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the substance is good. Substance is what matters. But I think the cake on the icing on the cake would be if you do the slides also a little bit.
Yes, yes.
That's all I
Yes,
have to say.
Agreed.